When one single US attack brought reports of up to 140 civilian deaths, Afghanistan was outraged. Now there's an admission with a US military investigation pointing to a failure in procedures and tactics. Is it the tip of the iceberg, a new transparent strategy, or an admission of failure? Afghanistan, the US military and the mounting civilian casualties. This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Quote, there were some problems, end quote. You can call it an admission, you can call it an understatement, you can call it whatever you want. The US has at least said it may have got it wrong. What we're talking about is an incident in Afghanistan in early May, a US airstrike purportedly against the Taliban, but one which claimed a conflicting number of civilian lives. This is where it happened on the map, Farah province in western Afghanistan, a part of the country which hadn't seen so much unrest until this incident really put the region into the headlines, and now more so because of this admission. The US military had previously said the death toll was around 90 and that civilian deaths far outnumbered, or were far outnumbered, I should say, by those of the Taliban. That was disputed by an Afghan human rights group, which put the civilian total closer to 100, and then again by Afghan officials who claimed 140 civilians were killed in the strike. Now the US investigation has turned up evidence that maybe things could have been done better.
There were some problems with some tactics, techniques, and procedures, or the way in which close air support was supposed to have been executed in this case, such that at least with one of the aircraft involved, a B-1 bomber, that plane, because of how it takes its bombing routes, had to break away from positive ID of their target at one point.
All right, so there's a bit of background and a bit of reaction. Let's bring in our guests now to talk about it all. In Kabul is Erica Gaston. She is a consultant on civilian casualties for the Open Society Institute. And in Philadelphia is Bill Roggio, the editor of the Long War Journal. Mr. Roggio is a former US Marine, so I'm sure he can give us some perspective on that side of the story a little bit later. What I want to do is start with the same question to both of you and just get your views on the significance of such an admission. Erica, we'll start with you.
Right. I mean, I think, everyone here in Afghanistan has just been in an uproar about the Farah incident. It really dramatized for so many Afghan civilians what they think is exactly going wrong in Afghanistan and generated tremendous anger and resentment. There are, the numbers are still out. It's still not conclusive how many civilians were killed, but I think the perception that so many innocent civilians were killed in this has just been incredibly damaging in terms of the international community's position here.
Bill Roggio, the significance of this admission in particular?
Well, this isn't the first admission that the U.S. has made as far as problems that have occurred in airstrikes. I think we're 7 years into this conflict, and it's a very difficult war to fight. It's also a war that's being fought largely among the population. While it is certainly it is a big concern, and protecting the civilian population is a major concern, these incidents are going to happen. I would almost guarantee that something like this will happen again in the future. I would say that one thing this incident does highlight is that there no doubt is a reliance on air power in Afghanistan because of the low number of both Afghan and foreign forces. So I think with the surge, you're going to see less incidents like this taking place. I think it's important for the U.S. military to admit where it did make errors, but I do think that a lot of groups blow these types of issues out of proportion. It is extremely difficult when you are in a combat situation, as the events are happening, to sit down and meticulously plan an airstrike. There are troops, both Afghan and U.S. troops, that were involved in this incident, and those are life and death moments, and you have to make snapshot decisions, and often, or a lot of times, those decisions will be wrong.
Erica, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly true. I think it's always hard to kind of second-guess decisions that are made in the heat of the moment. I think what's more concerning, both for human rights activists and for the Afghan communities themselves, is that this has been one of the most vocal complaints. They've been saying for years that tactics need to be revised in order to minimize civilian casualties. And so the fact that an incident like this happens where they say, yes, we didn't even follow our own procedures to minimize them is really, really concerning.
I'm pleased to say that we have got a third guest joining us from Kabul who can now join in the conversation. Now, that is Prince Ali Siraj, who's from the National Coalition Dialogue with Afghan tribes. He's in Kabul, as I say. Thank you for your time, Prince Ali. In your opinion, and from the information that is available on this particular incident, where do you think it went so wrong?
It went so wrong as it's been going wrong in the past. False intelligence, incorrect intelligence, depending on information which is not correct, disregarding the people within the villages. I've been hearing the conversation going on. The number of people that got killed in Farah is 151 at the last count. I sent my own people over there with UNIMA and did the body count in the area. Most of the ones killed were children and women. The thing that's wrong is because there's totally disregard for human life in Afghanistan. This is a situation, I mean, I can appreciate the fact that the Taliban hide within the villages. But what we're going to do, wipe out the entire village in order to get at 5 or 6 Taliban members? Why don't we use the individuals living within the village to give the information as to where the Taliban are, so that the military, the coalition, and the Afghan National Army can make take correct actions against that. This way of blindly bombing because they have heard that the Taliban within a particular village, this is not the first time. I mean, we keep talking about, oh, you know, we have to make sure that this is not done in the future. But when is the future going to stop? We did the same thing in Shindan, we did the same thing in Grishk, we did the same thing in Bogran, we did the same thing in Sangin, we did it in Paktia, we did it in Panjwai. Thousands of Afghans are being killed every year. We do not accept collateral damage. This is not the Afghan culture.
But I think
this is why the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda.
I think you've raised a very, very good point, and I'm actually going to put this to Bill Roggio over in Philadelphia, because I said before he is a former Marine, and perhaps he can give us some insight. Now, Prince Ali made this very good point that there is Taliban militants, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, hiding in amongst the populations. Not even hiding, just part of the populations they are. Can you explain to us in simple layman's terms, if it's possible, the rules of engagement? If you know that there are civilians involved or civilians in an area where you believe them to be militants, what are the rules about going in? Do you go in unless you're 100% certain? Do you go in knowing that there are civilians? How does it work?
Well, first of all, there is no such thing as 100% certainty, particularly when an enemy is hiding within the population. The rules of engagement are pretty basic. Basically, what they want to do is do whatever you can to limit civilian casualties. So if the Taliban are going to retreat into building and it is known that civilians are in that building, they're not going to drop a bomb on it. But it's also impossible to have 100% perfect intelligence to know that the Taliban are inside of a building that is either abandoned or that there's people inside. The particular incident in Farah province, this wasn't just a case of we had intelligence and we dropped a bomb. What the Taliban did is they set an ambush up for the Afghan troops who were responding to reports of beheadings of civilians. They went in, they were ambushed, they called the U.S. military for help. The U.S. military came in for help. They were pinned down. This was an active engagement of combat. And in that case, the rules of engagement are a little bit, the soldiers themselves have to protect themselves. So the problem that occurred in one of these situations where the rules of engagement were put aside, according to the U.S. military, was that they saw the Taliban organizing in an area and preparing for an attack. What the rules of engagement there says is, well, just because they're organizing doesn't mean that you can go ahead and launch an attack there, that you need to wait until they're a direct threat. Well, depending on, for us sitting here in a studio, that's a very simple decision to say they shouldn't have dropped that bomb. For those troops that are on the ground that are under fire, it's a little bit different situation.
Erica.
So, but look, I've been out with the military units. I've watched meticulous planning.
Erica, go ahead.
I would just say, at least in the Farah incident, though, the bombs that actually resulted in the majority of deaths didn't occur in the immediate firefight. It wasn't to protect the troops. Most of them occurred, according to the investigations that have come out, hours later. They had a firefight, they broke engagement, and hours later they targeted 3 compounds in a civilian area. Now, yes, it is true that you can't be 100% sure whether there are civilians in that area or not, and the military has not yet released its videos and intelligence. But it does raise a question of why they were dropping bombs in a populated area. Was there more that could have been done to protect civilians? And if so, they should have done so, both out of concern for international humanitarian law and for their own strategy.
I want to look now briefly and technically speaking at who is to blame, if we can use that word. Well, at least the group involved in Farah province was called the US Marine Corps Special Operations Command, MARSOC is how it's known. It was a creation of the former Defence Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, originally to plug gaps in the Special Forces world, but nowadays it focuses pretty much on Afghanistan and Pakistan. The key issue, I think, here is that MARSOC is behind at least 3 of Afghanistan's worst civilian casualty incidents. Go back, March 2007, when a MARSOC force of 120 men opened fire on civilians in Nangarhar province. That killed 19 people after an attack on the Marines, mind you. A military hearing, though, cleared the task force from criminal charges. The next year, August 2008, a MARSOC strike on Azizabad in Herat province killed more than 90 people, mostly children. And then, as we've been talking about, Farah, May 2009, 140 civilians killed, including 93 children. Villagers said the most devastating bombs were actually dropped long after the fighting had finished and when Taliban forces were retreating. Let's go back to Prince Ali Siraj in Kabul. I think the interesting thing is when we... Oh, go ahead.
These are not the only 3 incidences. There was a case in Panjwai a year and a half, 2 years ago. There was a case in Bohran in Helmand. There was a case in Grishk where over 60 people were killed. I mean, this has been going on and on continuously. See, my thing is that we all would like to fight the Taliban, and we all want to get rid of the Taliban out of Afghanistan and the Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. But if we know for a fact that these people are hiding within a village, let's put everything on a scale. You know, we kill 150 innocent Afghans. How many Taliban did we get? And every instance, if you look, there may be 2, 3, 4, or 5, 6 Taliban, but tens and tens of Afghans being killed in these cases. This is not the right way to do it. And the law, the rule of engagement, as my friend was talking about, the Western rule of engagement does not apply to Afghanistan. We have been warriors and fighting and protecting our nation for 5,000 years. We have a system of fighting. We have a system of communications. If the coalition would only take time to establish relationships with the different tribes and develop an intelligence system within the tribes, instead of listening to their interpreters and listening to some individual who has animosity towards another individual within a particular area, this is not going to stop. It's just going to increase. I don't care how many more soldiers they bring to Afghanistan. The surge is not going to work in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not Iraq. Afghans are not Arabs. What worked in Iraq is not going to work in Afghanistan. The only thing that's going to work in Afghanistan is that we have to engage the people of Afghanistan, the tribes of Afghanistan, work with them and find the solutions through them, not by just going and bombing them, because all this is doing is shoving the people of Afghanistan, pushing the people into the open arms of the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Look at what's going on in the country right now. Close to 80%. I'm not saying it's under the control of the Taliban, but the Taliban have influence in almost 80% of Afghanistan. Why hasn't the number, if this bombing and everything else is so successful, how come the Taliban are gaining influence in Afghanistan and that they're not, we are not being able to get rid of them? This is because it's mismanaged and misplanned. This has got to be a coalition, this cooperation between the coalition, the government of Afghanistan, and the tribes.
I'd like to just jump in there, Prince Ali, because I'd like to look more, and you've raised it there, about the issue, and it's that classic phrase, really, winning the hearts and minds, because as Prince Ali just said, we can't forget the people who are one of the most important elements in winning this war in Afghanistan. They're the ones caught in the crossfire between Taliban and international forces. They directly bear the cost of conflict. They are instrumental, therefore, in resolving it. US President Barack Obama acknowledged as much in his speech to the Muslim world recently in Cairo.
I also made it clear that the United States will work with our Afghan and international partners to make every effort to avoid civilian casualties as we help the Afghan government combat our common enemy.
And the same sentiment was echoed by the United Nations Special Representative in Afghanistan, Kai Ide.
I think we've seen how repeated incidents of civilian casualties affect the relationship between the Afghan people and the international community. There has been a decline in certain parts of the country in support for the international military. It's important to regain that support. And avoiding civilian casualties is, of course, one important element in securing and increasing support from the Afghan people.
So they're talking the talk, aren't they? But why is it so hard to walk the walk? Civilians may not have been intentionally targeted, but is enough being done to avoid such incidents? The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan estimates an almost 40% increase in civilian deaths in 2008, some, to be fair, by insurgents and others by international and Afghan forces. Bottom line, though, innocent civilians are dying and people are losing patience and they are losing faith.
They are always bombing and killing women and children. They came to fight Islam, or else they would have come with a passport. They came with guns. We can be their friends when they become Muslims.
We demand the withdrawal of the wild and brutal invaders from our country. The foreign invaders are responsible for the insecurity in the country. We condemn them for continuing to kill innocent civilians.
Bill Roggio in Philadelphia, you made a very fair point earlier in the show saying that it is war and people are going to die. It's as simple as that. Civilian casualties are going to happen and there is no intent to go after areas where civilians are. However, no matter how much the US or any international force says it takes care and it tries to discriminate, those people we just heard in that little clip there, they're never going to believe that, are they?
No, they probably won't, particularly the first individual. It sounded like that he was never going to believe this. You know, look, we don't see the same collective outrage when the Taliban intentionally targets civilians with suicide attacks, such as one in Khost where they blew up suicide car bombers, killed children were walking by just because they were guilty of walking outside of a U.S. outpost in Khost. You know,
you don't think we see enough outrage on those?
Airstrikes happen. Absolutely not. I mean, I've never been called on a radio or a television program to discuss those type of incidents, but as soon as there's a major attack that kills civilians and it's done from U.S. airplanes, you know, my phone starts to ring. So, you know, I think that tells us a lot about the biases that do exist.
Erica Gusson, I think Bill Roggio makes a really good point there that the media, particularly the international media, are quick to jump on the US and the international forces because they were the invading forces for when these sorts of things happen. But is there enough outrage perhaps over Taliban attacks, which are also claiming civilian lives? Because it's both sides that are claiming civilian lives.
I actually agree. I think that, you know, based on statistics from the last year, insurgents were actually responsible for more civilian deaths. You know, nonetheless, from the perception of the Afghan community, we were just talking about hearts and minds, they have higher expectations of international forces. They expected that international forces came to Afghanistan bringing them peace and stability, and so there's even more outrage when civilian deaths are caused by international forces. So yes, there does need to be a balance. There does need to be critiques, and there do need to be recommendations for both insurgents and international forces, but we have to keep that in mind in terms of what the Afghan perceptions are.
Prince Ali, you wanted to jump in there with something?
Yes, first of all, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It was the coalition's bombing that increased. As the coalition bombs and kills more innocent people, you're going to see more and more Taliban members coming into Afghanistan, and you're going to have fighting, which is going to eventually end up in killing of innocent people on both sides. The reason is, who do we complain to as far as the insurgents are concerned? But the other mistake that we are making over here is that we are calling the situation in Afghanistan a war. This is a mistake. Afghanistan should not be looked upon as a war. It should be considered as an extreme insurgency, as it was in the Malayan experience of 1940 to 1962. As long as we keep referring to this as a war, then we're going to have more casualties and we're going to have more innocent lives lost.
I mean, forgive me from sitting here in a studio in Doha and saying this, but it looks a lot like a war from here.
No, a war is organized groups fighting against each other. You're dealing with a group of ragtag people who have come from Chechnya, from Sudan, from Libya, from Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, Uzbekistan. They're not there, and they're not in Afghanistan because they want to bring any religious relief to Afghanistan. They're not there because they want to defend the Afghan people against the foreign invaders. They are there just because they want to make some money. But in the process of fighting these people, we are killing the Afghans. If these people that are coming into Afghanistan and they are the enemies of Afghanistan and they're the enemies of the Afghan people, How come nobody's asking the Afghans if they want to defend themselves? I am the president of the National Coalition for the Dialogue with the Tribes of Afghanistan. I represent every tribe in Afghanistan. I have been working with NATO officers, NATO generals, from the time of General Richards through General McNeil through General McKiernan. I have not met General Crystal as yet. I have met with every single ambassador in Afghanistan. They know who I am. They know what I can do. I keep telling them, unless we sit down and talk to the people of Afghanistan and involve the people in their own defenses and in their own future, you cannot defend the people who have been totally sidelined and nobody's asking them what they want.
Okay, so
what is wrong with asking the people?
We hear quite unequivocally there what Prince Ali Siraj can do on behalf of the Afghan tribes. I wonder about what another man can do, and that's Barack Obama. Bill, I'll come to you with this question, seeing as you are there in the States, and I mean this with the greatest amount of respect. But Barack Obama talks a great game, and I think that's part of the reason why people have really responded to him. What, though, do you think he actually has to do? You've made the point that casualties, civilian casualties, are going to happen in war, fair enough. But this is getting to a point where the Afghan people can't accept this. What concrete step does he have to take as Commander-in-Chief?
I don't believe there's much as Commander-in-Chief that he really can do to influence this. I do think that Prince Ali makes some very interesting points. However, and the things that really need to be done to provide the security in Afghanistan are going to take more than a decade to do, and that's build the Afghan army, get the Afghan police to be a respectable institution, engage the tribes, and get the local tribal support that is needed. These are things that need to be done, things that President Obama has said that, well, I think his Afghan policy has been quite vague, but this is these type of tactics are supposedly going to be implemented by the coalition. I think that really is what needs to be done. Build the security forces, and they need to really relook at the reconstruction efforts there in Afghanistan and make sure, get the waste out of there. Corruption in Afghan government. These are all big problems. These are not problems that are going to be fixed overnight. One of my complaints with President Obama is I think that he's looking very short term here. In the war, it is a war, the war in Afghanistan. He wants a quick solution, and I don't think a quick solution exists. I think it's going to take time, and I think that this could be the real failing of the president.
And what about the so-called surge as well? Prince Ali made the point that Afghanistan is not Iraq, and you're not necessarily going to get the same results that you got in Iraq with the surge, and the point that you put more troops into a country where people resent the troops in the first place.
Well, the same things were said about in Iraq, that more troops would actually cause the security situation to deteriorate in Iraq. The reality is there's not enough Afghan security forces. After 7 years, we have an 80,000-man Afghan army. The Afghan National Police Force has been largely disbanded because of corruption. Who is going to provide the security? And the reality is, in some areas, coalition troops are going to have to do this. And the reality is, in some areas, particularly in southern Afghanistan, there has to be some rooting out of the Taliban, and coalition forces are going to, by and large, be doing this in conjunction with Afghan forces. But until the Afghan security forces are built up, we are not going to be able to draw down coalition troops.
Folks, we're all out of time here at Inside Story, but I want to thank all three of you for joining us for that great discussion. Prince Ali Siraj there in Kabul, Bill Roggio in Philadelphia, and also Erica Gaston in Kabul. Thanks for your thoughts today, and thank you to you, our viewers, for joining us for Inside Story. You can send comments and suggestions on the show, or for future shows even. InsideStory@aljazeera.net is our email address. From the whole team, though, it's goodbye for now.